Okay. Sending a text here. Just double checking that people can hear me. Just listening over. I can hear fairly well what Jesse's saying from up here. Just saying that there's been some. This is a journey of lots of highs and lows. Lots of times where he thought he wasn't gonna make it, even when he was in lead, as he has been in lead here for over half the race. And he, definitely had some moments where he's like, I think I screwed this up. Oftentimes, even though to us, what we saw, he really didn't screw anything up. He ran a really smart, kind of masterful series of runs and rests to get to this point. I haven't really, it feels like he didn't make any crazy bold decisions or mistakes. Just a really good and solid run, and not having to ask like his dogs to go and run 80 or 90 miles straight. He had his longest run here so far has been just over 70, and it was right into his 24-hour break. As he beds his dogs down here. For their probably final trail nap. There he is. Definitely feels like it's probably somewhere around 0 degrees here. Probably one of the colder nights. It's only really been below 0 this last night and the night before. Been a pretty warm race. Definitely had some wind on the coast, of course, but nothing of a biblical proportion quite yet. But maybe we'll get some stories from Jesse on his run from Koyak to Elam and Elam to here. But right now, yeah, it is pretty chilly. There's a breeze in the air, and it's probably close to 0, maybe a little bit colder. Got to stretch out the old back. Apparently standing on a dog sled for 10.5 days can be. Now he's doing his infamous Jessie Holmes White Mountain Cuddle Puddle. Got all his dogs in the giant oval of straw. They're a team that's bonded and connected and become a brotherhood and a sisterhood over the course of the last 1,058 miles. Roughly. So they're real comfortable cuddling up with one another. Lots of trust between those dogs, and of course between the dogs and between Jessie. And we've got 1, 2, 3 veterinarians there checking the dogs, making sure they're doing well. Jessie did say he'll likely return one of his dogs here in White Mountain, but oftentimes when you come to an 8-hour rest, you think you're going to just send a dog home, you kind of want to wait until you get closer to the end of your 8-hour rest. Maybe see if they're doing better. But also, you don't really, going 72 miles to Nome. You can drop, I think you can send a dog home in safety, but you don't really want to take a dog that you think maybe, possibly shouldn't go. Just like the idea of just having that stress on your mind going through this really difficult final run. sometimes that's enough of a reason. Maybe nothing's wrong with the dog, but maybe you perceive there to be something wrong, and you already know for a fact you have 8 good ones. So you send that dog home that you think is running a little differently, or something's off, but you can't quite point it out. Those are the kind of reasons you send dogs home on this race. Just pretty minor. Sometimes it's not even a problem. Sometimes you just don't want to take care of 16 dogs all the time, because it takes so long to booty up all those feet. There's some locals down there. One of them said, "My dad calls Shaq Tulik the real blowhole." And that was right after Jessie was describing some of the crazy winds there in Shaq Tulik. I got to be there for some of the wind. Even the locals were pretty chilled when they were outside. But this is fair weather. Check out the moon here real quick. Just going to zoom out and give you guys a good look at this full moon. It's setting. It's orange. It's beautiful, beautiful morning here in White Mountain. Look at that. Now, let me see if I can fix some settings here. There's that full moon. So if we're going to see, I'm pretty sure it's full right now. If not, it's going to be like full tomorrow. But he's going to be scheduled to leave here. I wasn't clocking in Jessie's time. But let's say, if it's 9 o'clock-ish, or 8:30, we'll say, 8:30 plus 8, 12:30, 4:30. So he'll be leaving it, and he'll have the first 4 to 5 hours of his run with the sun up, as the veterinarians navigate the cuddle puddle here of his dogs. So he'll have 4 or 5 hours of this run, which is typically somewhere close to at the fastest, it's like 9.5 hours. That'd be incredible. But usually, it could be a 12-hour run there in the Nome. So that means he'll probably be looking at a finish that is early morning tomorrow. Could somewhere between 2 and 6 a.m. And the streets of Nome are going to be awaiting Mr. Holmes, but it's not over yet. It's a really difficult run. It's a lonely trail. You get to have your dogs with you, but you can tell Jesse's excited to see some familiar faces here in White Mountain that he's seen up and down the trail. Dan Carter, the race stretch there, and that he's chatting with. He's talking about his lead dog, Polar, who's been crushing it. He's getting his cooker going. The cooker, and some of you guys have heard this before, some of you maybe haven't, but he's got liquid methanol on the bottom there of that, and you can just take a lighter to it at minus 40 degrees at any temperature, and that it burns evenly and safely. And then he's going to walk to a hole in the ice right here, and by walk, he's going to jog, because when you're in this race, the quicker that you can get that water hot and that food ready, and these dogs fed, cared for, massaged, with their foot ointment or whatever they need, and it's different for every dog team. But the sooner you can do that and just leave them alone and let them sleep, a lot of that recovery, yes, some of it's happening with massages and remedies, but most of it's just happening with them getting to rest their bodies and their minds, and there is a huge mental part to this for the dogs. As you see in little interview, this is a behind the scenes interview here that we get to see on the live stream. This will be up on, we got internet here. We're going to upload this ASAP. What you're witnessing right now. Our best man Kyle here in White Mountain, so you'll see this video. But the dogs, obviously they got to have great conditioning and training and physical fortitude, but the mental part of this for sled dog teams, going and spending 700 plus miles on a river. It's like running on a treadmill for us humans, just sitting there and running on a treadmill for days and days and days and days. It can be a little bit draining mentally, and unless you have trained your dogs for it, even then, I think just like the humans that are excited to be done with the Yukon River as they got to Caltech 2, these dogs were pretty fired up going west to the coast on that portage run from Caltech to Unalakleet. And I think Jessie Holmes' team is a great example of a dog team that got off the river and then they kicked it up a notch because they were just excited to not be on that river. You've heard Riley Dyke and Ryan Reddington, among other mushers, say that this is definitely the most difficult Iditarod they've ever done. It's obviously the longest Iditarod in history, the longest sled dog race in history. In fact, if you look at some of the older sled dog races, they did say, the older Iditarods, there was people that said they were 1,100. It was a 1,100 mile race, but back then they didn't have inReaches and GPSs to exactly clock calculate the exact distance of those races. It was estimated based on some maps and some, I don't want to use the word ancient technology, but some, older methods to clock the distance. So I think it may have been slightly shorter than 1,100 miles when they were saying it was. And so this one is literally over 100 or 1,100 miles, and without a doubt the longest sled dog race that we've ever seen. Started in Fairbanks, went west to Nenana, to Manly, Tanana, Ruby, Galena, Nulato, Caltag, Eagle Island, down to Grayling, Anvik, Shagaluk, and back to Grayling, up the Yukon River to Eagle Island, Caltag 2. Long run over there to the coast to Unalakleet, and that was the big thing, those long runs. Jesse mastered the coast, went Unalakleet, Shaktoolik, Koyuk, Elam, White Mountain is where we're at right now. We had a few really long runs. First one was that Manly, Nenana to Manly, an 85, 86 mile run that you had to break up some way, somehow. This race was really good for teams that are good at camping out on the trail, and I think it'd be interesting to see if some of our statisticians on the live stream. There's been some great insiders that have been able to calculate some data and figure out how many checkpoints did Jesse stay in. I don't think he stayed in Nenana or Manly or Tanana. I think he did stay in Ruby. He did 24 in Caltag. He didn't stay in Eagle Island. He did stay in Anvik and Grayling. And then the next place he stayed was Caltag 2. Didn't stay in Unk or Shaktoolik. He did stay in Koyuk. So that's and then here he stayed in Elam, and he's here. So, 5 checkpoints he stopped at. So he's been a master, along with several other mushers, but just his ability to camp out on the trail and go through these checkpoints, and that's, takes a lot of practice. That he's been practicing this for 8+ years. This guy was Rookie of the Year back in, I want to say, 2017. He came in 7th place. That's not that long ago that he was just learning this race. He's had some great mentors. He's won a bunch of mid-distance races, 300s, some 400-mile races, the Kobuk 440 being one of the tougher races besides this one. But also being able to train your dogs to go through checkpoints. A lot of these dog teams, they get to a checkpoint, they see the lights, the people, the straw bales, they love the straw. And they're like, oh, cool, this is where we're stopping. And then you say to your dogs, oh, actually, we got to go like another hour and a half before we stop. Jessie's dog team's like, oh, okay, no problem. Some dog teams might be like, I'm pretty sure you're supposed to stay here. We're supposed to stay here and camp here in Ruby, coach. So him being able to train his dog team like that, get them, it's about that mental aspect. I mean, the physicality of it is there. These dogs are ultra marathon runners, and in this case, so is Jessie. This guy's run 50-mile, 100-mile races himself, and by doing that, he can feel the same, feelings that his dog team is feeling. Like, he go and run 100 miles, you say, all right, well, I got some aches and pains. Why don't I try some of these remedies on myself that I've been doing on my dogs? He can just relate to them even better, having run some ultra marathons. Jessie Holmes is able to take care of his dog team that much better, having gone through those events himself. He does them in the summer around Alaska, and he'll just train in the wilderness. No one's heard from Jessie in like months, and it's June, July. He just shows up to Palmer, Alaska, and where tens of thousands of people live, and he's just like, hey, how's it going? And you can't even really tell he's a reality TV star if you see him in person. And he goes there and competes in a race with these people that train for ultra marathons every year, all year, for all around the world. And he goes in there and he gets like 2nd or 3rd place. I heard he did that with a race in Hatcher Pass. He came in 3rd place. It was like 10 or 12 miles just straight uphill. Got done with the race and ran back in the different direction. Just, the guys just got grit. Everyone in this race has grit, but he's definitely on another level. And he's just a kind person from my experiences with him as he snacks his dog team. They've been eating really well, it seems. Every time I see them eat or get offered food, they're all eating. Looks like these are some chicken skins, which is high in fat content, good for the cold and the wind. It's kind of like jet fuel for these guys as they're burning calories every day. The dogs need to eat 10 to 12,000 calories a day. These dogs are weighing about 50 pounds. So that'd be like an average sized person, 150-pound person, eating 30,000 calories every day. And at least, I mean, some of these dog teams are crushing 15,000 calories a day. But that's that jet fuel these guys are burning to be able to run these 120-mile days, day in and day out for 10 straight days. It's also what the dogs use to fuel their internal furnace and keep them warm from the inside out. And then they also have long coats of insulation that traps that heat that their metabolism creates. And then you can see these guys are wearing insulated dog coats. So that's even extra insulation for them to stay toasty. They would, if you didn't have coats on them, they'd still be warm. Here's the thing though. They got to burn more calories to maintain that warmth. So you put the coats on them, and your calories that you're feeding your dog team go a longer way. And then instead of having to burn more calories to stay warm, they're staying warm a little bit easier with the dog coats on, and they can reallocate those calories towards running the coast, dealing with the wind and the cold and the hills of this trail. And I think this dog team is really, really excited based on their speeds and run times along the coast. They're just pumped up about the coast. You know, probably a lot of these dogs have done this race last year with Jessie. And when they get to the coast, they know they're close. They know where the finish line is. And they got that little extra pep in their step. And now we got our little cuddle puddle of dogs. He's giving them a snack. Now he's mixing up some food. And while he's doing that, he's just crushing an interview with the Bruce Lee and Christian. And he's describing the run into here. The run into White Mountain goes over a series of mountains, one of which, or maybe the whole area, I got to do that section one time on a dog team, but it's called Little McKinley. And it is some serious, I mean, Little McKinley named after Mount McKinley or Denali. Not to, I know it's a hot button topic for some people, but Little McKinley here is, named after the tallest mountain in North America. So you can imagine it's not exactly a walk in the park getting up and over that thing. He's talking about some of the different sleds he's used over the years, mentioning a Hans Gott sled. There's the Sled Dog System sleds. There's dog paddle sled design. There's all kinds of different sleds that you can use in this race. There's actually no rule as to what kind of sled you can use. The only rules is that you got to have one. It can't be self-propelled. You can't put a sail on your sled to help blow you faster down the trail, for example, which I believe somebody tried. I want to say Boozer tried that one year, getting a sail going. So then they had to write that in the rules the next year. And then you got to be able to carry a dog that's maybe a tired or sore dog. You got to be able to comfortably carry them in the sled. So those are the rules for what kind of sled you have. You can make it out of whatever material you want. It can be as light or as heavy as you'd like. It can be as long or as wide as you would want. But they all kind of have the pretty similar specs. You've seen a lot of dog trailers on the back of these dog teams, especially early on in the race when you had all of those long runs and you had to pack extra stuff for camping out. Some cases you had to camp out 2 times before you would see the next checkpoint. Here's the moon setting over the mountains, the Topcock Hills. Just a beautiful day we're going to have here today. So we see Matt Hall coming in here in an hour or two, and Paige right behind him. We're going to have some awesome action here in White Mountain. How's it going down there? You want anything to say on the microphone?
No, just give you an update of what he said about the run.
So Bruce Lee is here. He's been down hanging out with Jessie and watching him take care of the dogs, seeing what the vets are looking at in his team, and I've overheard little bits and pieces of what Jessie's been saying, but I'm going to pass the microphone over to Bruce, and he can share maybe a couple of fun stories that Jessie shared with him.
Well, Jesse talking about his run over here, the biggest thing is that he was kind of in an emotional turmoil on whether to rest at Elam or do the big push and come all the way here and secure his position for a win. But he said the dogs seemed a little bit concerned about the run. Didn't seem quite at the peak that he's had them at, and he decided it was better to gamble, throw on an extra rest, and pick them back up. So with his rest combination of Koyuk for about 5 hours and then his rest at Elam, he said when he came out of Elam, he had a completely different dog team, really perky. He then realized that was the right thing to do. He was concerned about Matt coming up behind him, but he got out of there. And it's a really mountainous run in one section between Elam and White Mountain, and that gave him the extra power to get over those hills. He was also telling us that his sled design going down some of the steep downhills helped him by its flexibility, keeping the sled on track, taking tension off the gang line for the sleds, for the dogs, but also for him, it made it a lot easier to relax a little bit coming down some of those big hills, especially one dropping onto Gullivan Bay. But things are going pretty good for him. He's mainly just really happy about taking that rest and seeing his dogs pick up a little bit more speed. He is thinking he'll probably leave one dog behind here, return one dog before the run into Nome, but he's got 8 hours to make all those decisions. So there's going to be a little clip put up of soon here of him talking, and we'll do an interview with him later in the day when he gets a little rest and some food. But right now he's just taking care of the dogs and then wants to get a cup of hot tea and take a nap.
Awesome. Thanks, Bruce. And he's going to make sure his dogs get a thorough checkpoint routine here, given that he's got a few extra hours. Typically, these dog teams are stopping for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, the competitive ones. There's a couple of mandatory 8-hour rests, with this being one of them, but when you're doing those rests, sometimes based on what the dogs need, you might just stop and drop them a bunch of snacks, lay down the straw, maybe throw a couple of wrist wraps on some of the dogs that you want to make sure that they're not getting sore, and then just let them sleep, leave them alone, and make it be a 15-minute thing. But when you have an full 8 hours to rest, then you can have that luxury of, all right, let me get really kind of thorough with checking these dogs and seeing how they're doing. You know, you've watched them just run over 1,000 miles to get here, so you have a really good idea of who needs what, when, and how much when it comes to the actual hands-on care. And then you also the science of feeding your dog team. I mean, this is what makes these guys so good. To me, like at the very bottom of the list is like being able to ride the sled well. Like anybody, for the most part, if you're like somewhat active of a human being and you like to go on runs or you play tennis or you ride your bicycle around town, if you can do that kind of stuff, if you did like one day on a sled you'd probably be fairly comfortable, especially running on like a flat, straight trail. Now, there is some moments where it takes some serious athleticism, but what makes these mushers so good is what they're doing right now, getting their dog team fed the right ingredients. What meat do they like? Does it have enough fat content and protein? How much kibble are you adding? Is there good water content in your meal? Did you feed them enough, or did you overfeed them? Should you feed them right now, or let them take a nap first and feed them later? Should you feed them twice? Oftentimes you see subtle little tricks to getting your dogs to eat. We saw Matt Hall busting out cans of cat food and putting that on top of his dog's meal, and all of his dogs kind of turned their nose at first to his first, course of dog food that he gave his team, and then he busts out some cat food. I was like, what is going on here? Busts out some cat food, and you could tell all the dogs were like waiting for that moment. They were all like, yeah, I mean, what you made looks kind of good, but I'm waiting. I know you're gonna give me some cat food here in a second. So just like those little tricks. What's another one is when you feed your team in a dish or a bowl, like you might feed your dogs at home. You're gonna have it be kind of the consistency of a really hearty soup. Sometimes the dogs don't really want it to be that liquidy. Like if you have a soup, when you cook yourself a ramen and there's like 2 cups of water in it, you're like, I don't want all this water. I just want the noodles, Same with some of these dogs. They just want the noodles sometimes. So you give them the bowl that has the watery mix with the kibble and the meat and the fat. And look at this dog team eating. And they might be like, this is just too watery for me. And so you give them like 2 minutes to think about it, to eat it. And then you'll see a lot of these mushers take the bowl of food and just pour it right on the ground. So that water absorbs into the snow. And now the dogs just have the kibble and meat and all the noodles, so to speak. And they can just eat. And then they'll go from not eating the meal to, oh yeah, this is actually what I wanted. So just the way that you feed them, not necessarily what the ingredients are, that can be the difference, whether it's in a bowl or on the ground. Sometimes some dogs are like kind of hungry, but not super hungry. And every dog on this team is eating right now. This is incredible. But sometimes you might have a dog that's kind of hungry and you give them a gigantic scoop of food. And they're like, yeah, I don't want that. But then you come back later and you just give them like one little nugget of food. And they're like, actually, yeah, I could eat that. Give them a little tiny scoop later. Oh, okay, I could eat that. And next thing you know, they're like, actually, yeah, I'll take a full serving. Just how much you feed your dog's food. Some dogs are ready to crush 2 giant scoops, and some dogs just want a little something, and then that awakens their appetite to maybe eating a little bit more. You might have 6 of your dogs eat really well, and one or 2 or 3 of your dogs, they're like, I'm not quite ready to eat. So you take note, you let them go to sleep, you maybe come back an hour or 2 later and offer them some food again, and then boom, they just weren't quite hungry yet. So the timing is super important too. So that what makes a good musher is, yes, the care, the feeding, and then another equally important thing, and you can tell another equally important thing is choosing how long to run your team and how long to rest them. And that's, to me, what Jessie Holmes did maybe the best in this race. Like, I think that is what separated him, was the choices he made when it comes to running and resting. So seeing your dog team eat like these guys are eating, I mean, this dog team, unless Jessie, runs into a crazy storm, in my humble opinion, this dog team is winning the Iditarod. They're crushing food. They're up and moving. They got lots of pep in their step. They got a couple-hour lead on Matt Hall. They just look like unfazed. Like they didn't just run 1,000 miles. But the coast has upended lots of an amazing dog team, so there's only one way to really know if he's going to win this thing. But just based on if it wasn't the gnarliest run of the whole race coming up, I would say he's 100% got this. But you got the Topcock Hills. You've got the Blowhole. You got a 72-mile run. You got the fact that it's the longest ever race in the Iditarod, and these are the final miles of that lengthy race. Those are the miles that make the race long. A lot of people, you see some teams that haven't finished this race, they're like, it's just such a long race. Well, when you're halfway through the race, you haven't gotten to the part that's long yet. Jessie has, so we're kind of getting into uncharted territory, but you can just see all these dogs up and eating. They're searching for crumbs and leftovers. Probably going to feed them something else after this, something else after that. Just the toughest sled dog race that's ever happened. 2025 Iditarod. That's kind of seems, look, that's kind of a blanket statement. You don't know that for sure, but it's just so long. The river was so tough. Thankfully, the coast is been manageable and not too crazy. But just to get to the start line of this race, you'll hear this in the mushing community up here. Just getting to the start line of the Iditarod, all it takes to train a team, even just to be able to have the free time to train a dog team. Everybody's got a second job of some kind. You've got doctors and dentists and scientists and archaeologists and biologists that are just taking a couple weeks off to run this race and training their team once they get off work, working a 9 to 5, training at night and into the morning. Got fishermen and carpenters and people that just work every single day all summer long for 6 straight months. Just save up as much money as they possibly can to then spend it every single last penny on getting this dog team to Nome, getting to be out here with your team and doing something real difficult. And sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes there's factors that are out of your control. In order to train for this race, you got to train big, similar conditions. Sometimes you train in certain conditions, and then the Iditarod ends up being different conditions. You can have your team perfectly prepared in every single way and still not make it to the finish line. And nothing's guaranteed in this race. And you can just see how excited Jessie is to be here in this position. His dogs have all gotten a meal. They're starting to kind of bed down. He said, you heard Bruce say that they came off of their rest in Elam just fired up. running good. He thought about running straight from Koyuk, but could just tell on the way to Elam, that's probably not the move. He's been concerned about Matt. He's been chasing him, and I hope y'all are keeping an eye on the tracker. And I just overheard Jesse saying this is the time he starts thinking about getting in shape for some ultra marathons in the summer. Man, these people just don't. Some of these mushers, they just no off switch. Just always go, go, go. Jessie Holmes, the first musher here in White Mountain. Feels like finally this race, there's a finish line in sight for at least one team. We got a lot of teams still on the trail, some teams still in Caltag, which is, like almost 400 miles down the trail from here. Got a feeling I'm going to be in White Mountain for a little while. We're excited to see the first team make it. Seen the Iditarod have to make some tough decisions yesterday about having some teams' races ended. Just really hard for this race to be able to keep all the volunteers out here, at all the checkpoints all the way from here in White Mountain down the entire coast to Unalakleet and Caltag and Eagle Island.